You're desperate to lose weight. You've tried every diet known to man, but no matter how firm your resolve at the start, how committed you are to make a change, fit into that dress, or just start feeling good about yourself again, time and again, all those good intentions at the start begin to falter. Your motivation goes out the window, and there you are right back where you started, feeling fat and fed up. Now, NLP might not seem like an obvious choice to turn things around, but boy, oh boy, if you have the will, it has the answer to your prayers. Stick around to find out how. So there's no getting away from it. Dieting can be tedious and difficult to maintain, often producing, inconsistent results and basically making you feel like crap. And the gift of using NLP techniques to achieve your weight loss goals is when properly applied, it helps you make a change that lasts. No more yo-yoing up and down or thinking you got it cracked and then moments later something stressful crops up and once again you're floundering and blown out of the water. And if you've already tried everything else, well, there's nothing to lose, is there? And you may just find you actually achieve the weight loss that you want so badly and the body and fitness that you deserve. So physically speaking, weight gain or loss is determined by two things, notwithstanding those whose weight is obviously affected by ill health, of course. Fundamentally, it's about the food that you eat and then how much exercise or how active you are and the energy that you burn. What I will say at this point is that exercise will only get you so far. It can increase your metabolism. Yes, of course it can. But then that is also something that's affected by your age. And the older you are, the slower it gets, no matter how many hills you climb or how many treadmills you pound. Your diet, what you eat, is your starting point. So let's consider why it is that women particularly find it so hard to diet, why we continually fail to stick to it, even when we see our weight begin to fall. And that's in part down to your relationship with food overall, and partly about finding the true motivation behind both your desire to eat as well as your desire to lose weight. And all of this is dominated by how we think and relate to the world around us. So before diving into some techniques for helping you stick to a diet, it's going to be important to understand one of those factors, and that is how our brains work. Over the course of a few million years, our brains developed through three distinct phases. Initially, there was this primitive brain, the one that you might have heard referred to as the reptilian brain. Not very flattering, I know. However, it is the part of your brain that is all about instinct and represents our deepest and most fundamental responses. This part of the brain, needless to say, works at an unconscious level. Then came our limbic system, part of the brain responsible for your emotional senses, as well as basic reflexive physical functions such as breathing. Finally, we developed our neocortex, and that's regarded as the rational or thinking part of your brain. It's the part of the brain where your conscious thought lies, the place where you plan things, make rationalizations about the world around you and the people in it. When things go wrong is when the unconscious brain overrides your rational thinking, pitching you into behaviors and mindsets that often are unhelpful and create unwanted limitations. And let me just say here that happens a lot for a lot of people. How then does this relate to overeating, or should I say reducing what you eat? It's no great revelation to say that limiting our food consumption is easier said than done. Understanding the psychology of your behavior and your impulse to eat is key. We're driven by two central motivations in life, the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, and that's whether physical or psychological. For our very survival, nature ensures that eating for most of us is a pleasurable experience, whereas self-denial at a purely biological level just goes against every primal instinct. In order to overcome a primal urge requires your rational brain to take control of your behavior, which can be pretty challenging if you don't understand what's going on at a subconscious level. And that is where NLP comes in, because it places the emphasis on working with the unconscious behavior and your unconscious thinking, helps you untangle the psychology of your motivation, raising your self-awareness, gifting you with far greater power to choose, reframe your thinking and break behavior patterns that can sabotage you so that you can more easily make the changes in your life that you want. It's also important to understand that how you relate to the outside world is dependent on a number of factors. Firstly, your behavior and thinking patterns are developed over the course of your lifetime, all entirely, by the way, dictated by the values and beliefs that you form. Also, how you interact with the world is filtered through your five senses, usually with one sense being dominant, known in NLP as your preferred or primary representational system, that's PRS for short. For some, visual is their primary PRS. For others, they relate to the world kinesthetically, in other words, how it feels to them. Or it might be that you're inclined to the auditory, so you experience things initially in terms of sound. And the last consideration is that you retain knowledge and information accrued in your lifetime in the form of memories. Your memories essentially are you, and you are your memories. So to recap, we have the conscious and the unconscious brain. Then there's your values and beliefs, and they control your behavior. You've got your 5 senses, they determine how you filter your experiences, and a collection of memories that make up the sum of your life experience. Your values and beliefs, as I've said before, they dictate how you remember things and the emotional response that you feel in any given situation. Why NLP is so successful in helping break things like phobias, limiting beliefs, or achieving significant change in your life is because it pays attention to all of these things, most of which are operating at an unconscious level. NLP techniques effect changes in your thinking through 3 main stages. Firstly, it works to raise self-awareness, and by doing so improves the connection between your conscious and your unconscious mind. Accomplishing this leads to much more clarity about why you think and do as you do. Getting a handle on that leads to much greater autonomy over your thinking. You're no longer subject to the dictates of your unconscious mind, but can begin to recognize that you do have a choice about how you emotionally respond and behave. That level of insight allows you to override the emotional triggers, change your thinking, modify your behavior that might have previously led to unhelpful or unwanted outcomes. Now, we spent a little time exploring what makes us tick. Now we're going to look at some NLP strategies for achieving lasting weight loss. So first up, let's look at anchoring. Setting an anchor means consciously linking an external stimulus with an existing experience. Established using your 5 senses, you choose the desired feeling or state and associate it with a physical trigger. Once the anchor's set, you can reproduce the desired state by using that physical trigger, such as pressing your thumb and your forefinger together. Now, you can apply anchoring in a number of ways, but for the purpose of today's video, we're going to focus on kickstarting your motivation, when your willpower needs a bit of a boost. Firstly, I want you to try and find a place that's, quiet and free from distraction, and get comfortable. You can either sit or lie down, doesn't matter. And if you want to, close your eyes. Then you're going to choose a memory where you felt really motivated. And this is likely going to be something that you associate with happiness, or perhaps just a feeling of well-being. If you can associate a memory around feeling good about your weight or appearance, or a memory where you were doing really well on a diet, so much the better. But you know what? It really doesn't matter. The important thing is that it's a really positive, motivated, filled memory. And now ensure you're fully associated with the memory. In other words, you're seeing it through your own eyes. Next, you want to notice the sensory qualities related to that memory. And that could be in terms of colour. If there is colour, what are they? Are they bright? Are they dull? Is there any sound attached to that memory? How do you feel in that moment? Recall the memory in detail and picture it as vividly as you can, heightening as much as you can. As you're doing this, press your forefinger and your thumb together firmly. While doing this, focus on the emotional energy of that moment, and it should be a tangible sensation in your body. And as you work through this exercise, by all means, pause this video, rewind it, whatever you need to do until you've got the basics under your belt so you can develop it at your own pace. As you reach the peak of the visualization, when you feel your motivation and your excitement at its most, just before that feeling begins to recede, let your fingers and thumb fly apart. Then you're going to repeat the visualization and the finger-thumb connection several times. Take a moment between each repetition by thinking you're doing something completely unrelated. And this is called breaking state, and it helps your brain recognize the anchor's parameters so it can more easily reproduce them. Once you've successfully mastered that and established your chosen anchor, you should find that you can use the physical trigger of pressing fingers together to conjure and reproduce the feelings of motivation and excitement whenever you need to. Next, let's take a look at another NLP technique called future pacing. This is where you test out or mentally rehearse and imagine yourself in a future situation. The purpose is to test and ensure that your desired behavior will occur naturally and automatically. The situation may be related to maybe a problem, a challenge, or some limitation that's stopping you achieving a goal. So in the case of what we're talking about, it's going to be about sustaining your motivation. Just as when you began with anchoring, you need to fully associate. So in other words, see yourself in the future from a first-person perspective. Apply the technique to a time in the future when you predict you're going to need to feel motivated. For example, a time when you know you should be exercising, but you know what, the TV's on, couch feels super comfortable. Begin with your anchor, pressing thumb and forefinger together, and summon that heightened sense of motivation and excitement. Now, applying this sensation of high motivation, visualize yourself standing up full of energy, ready to exercise. Future pacing allows you to condition your response so the next occasion, when your incentive needs a bit of a refresh, using your anchor in this way can re-energize your sense of purpose. Don't forget, the point of anchoring is that once set, you can use it to conjure your motivation, whatever the context. At the heart of NLP is the idea of modeling excellence. By modeling the behavior, thinking, and emotional engagement of successful people, a wealth of techniques and processes can be adopted and applied, helping you achieve more success, problem solve effectively, and lead a more fulfilling life generally. In seeking an inspiration for weight loss, you may choose to look at someone who maybe models success of excellence in this way. Ideally, it should be a person perhaps who's not only embodies a mastery in motivation or coaching tools, but who has visibly succeeded. If appropriate, depending on who it is, it might even be helpful to interview them, maybe ask them about their mindset, attitude and behaviour when they've been pursuing or achieving a goal that they've set for themselves. So that can help provide really useful insights into how successful people think differently from the rest of us. You know, your desire to lose weight can be rooted in any number of things, and understanding your own reasons can be instrumental in achieving the results that you want. The trick is to get to the bottom of what's motivating you, and it's not always what you think. For example, many people when asked will say things like, well, I'll just be happier when I lose weight because I'm going to feel more attractive. But that in itself is not what is psychologically going on. Remember what I said about values and beliefs, that they are the very heart of what drives your behaviour. To create and gain clarity as to what's prompting you, you've got to try asking some fundamental questions. So it could be something like, well, how will successfully losing weight impact on my day-to-day life? Will it affect those around me? And if so, in what way? What are the underlying values that are driving my need? Unraveling your values and beliefs is achieved in NLP by something called values elicitation. It's a rather more difficult and complex thing than it sounds, and you will need to understand the process in order to fully answer the questions. In view of its complexity, rather than trying to explain it all here, I've actually just added a link to another video that I did on that subject. So if you want to know more, then by all means you can go and take a look. Some of the previous clients that I've talked to have come up with things like, it's about living a healthier life, making sure I'm setting a good example for my children, and I want to enjoy a more physically active life with my family. It's also worth spending some time assessing what or who has been stopping you from achieving your goal up to now. It probably goes without saying that honesty here, of course, is absolutely crucial. You should also consider and understand the positive intention behind your overeating or lack of exercise. What do I mean by that? Well, take time to reflect on what positives you believe will be derived from achieving your goal. Will you be more comfortable, enjoy greater freedom? What are the triggers in your environment or thinking patterns that you know cause you to eat? Actually, one dangerous thinking pattern that I personally noticed when I wanted to diet were those moments when, seemingly out of the blue, the idea would pop into my head that I wanted to eat something. That would then begin a cycle of what I used to describe as flirting and rehearsing with food. Now, you may recognise the ritual, and no matter how much I know I was starting down a slippery path of self-sabotage, I'd nevertheless begin mentally picking through the contents of my cupboard or fridge. Tasty little morsels would flash into my mind, and I'd become transfixed by exactly the foods I knew I should be avoiding, whether that be biscuits, chocolate, cheese, crisps, the lot of them. And I'm even salivating now just thinking about it. If it got really bad, then I'd even rehearse cooking an entire meal and imagining how that would taste, and my body would be flooded with endorphins in that anticipation of eating, which of course just made things worse. Suddenly, I would feel hungry and my stomach would feel empty when moments ago, nothing of the kind was happening. Obviously, I was ignoring my thinking brain as it tried to talk me down, rationalising that any pleasure I got from the food would be fleeting and then I'd really feel crap afterwards, and that my willpower was in tatters and that I'd have to begin all over again. What I learned to do was, in those moments when my train of thought started up, firstly, I'd make a real effort to stop the obsessing, choose something else to think about. And if that didn't work, then I'd just get a pen and paper and I'd write down all the reasons that I decided to lose weight in the first place. And I'd already done the values elicitation on this. And I found that this was a useful distraction, firstly, and it was also a way to reassert my reasons and determinations to go on a diet. Your relationship with certain foods, especially those that you either eat too much of or you should avoid altogether, is really tricky. For most, there's a tendency to see the food as the problem, that it's responsible and therefore to blame for your desire to eat it. In NLP, we call this operating in an affected state, meaning you're focused on the effect rather than paying attention to the cause. This means recognizing that you are choosing to eat the food, it's not choosing you. The fact is, you have to change your relationship with food in order to make headway and bolster your resolve. Also, if you view changing your eating habits as self-denial, then of course, denying yourself a particular food may result in losing weight and feeling better as a result, but it's almost impossible to sustain, and eventually your resolve weakens. It's also helpful to stop referring to a change in the things that you eat as a diet, because for most of us, that has all kinds of negative connotations. Approach it instead as a lifestyle change. That could include reducing portion size, maybe using smaller plates so that psychologically the difference isn't so obvious. Foods that are healthy and won't pile on the pounds don't have to be tasteless and boring. You have to be prepared to get creative. If you're a fast food fiend, then learning to cook perhaps might be a solution, and this will give you much greater control over what you put in your body, not to mention far less in the way of chemicals and preservatives. Doesn't have to be fancy, you don't need to become a chef. Buy a recipe book you like the look of, because there are loads of them, and one perhaps that offers easy, inexpensive but tasty recipes. If you're not sure how to make a start, you could even join a cookery class. Accountability is another element that can help your eating stay on the straight and narrow. Join a diet group. I've found loads on Facebook and I've added a couple of the links below to get you started. I've already mentioned it's important to change your relationship with food, and a particularly effective NLP technique to get you there is known as mapping across or like to dislike. You begin by thinking of, in this case, a food that you really enjoy but wish you didn't. Preferably a food that tends to be your downfall when you're on a diet. Next, you conversely think about a food that you really hate. The idea is that you learn to associate the characteristics of the hated food with the former. Done correctly, it results in you feeling the same way about the food you used to like as you do about the food you hate. How effective mapping across can be is exemplified by a session that I had with a former client whose weakness was crisps. I asked her to think about them, to picture them and relate to me what she visualised in terms of its size, position, intensity and so on. She immediately said she had a very clear associated picture of an open packet of crisps. The picture was really intense, it was dead centre in front of her, very, very bright and focused. It was in a frame and it was unmoving. Furthermore, she said that it had a specific sound, that there was the sound of packets rustling, the crunch of the crisps as she mentally ate them. And the sound was pretty loud and not particularly specific to a location. It was sort of all around her and it was a bit intermittent but really clear. And then lastly, she said she's able to almost taste the crisps and found that she was indeed salivating. The image was so vivid, it also triggered her kinesthetic submodality so that she could even feel the crisps in her mouth and the texture of the salt on her fingers, and there was even a compulsion to lick them. So the liked food stage was set. Now we move on to the food she disliked intensely. And this for her was stodgy meat pie drenched in a gloopy, cold, dark gravy. Completely relate to that, by the way. Same routine, asked to describe what she could see and feel. This time the image was much smaller and off to her left, and it was monochrome in colour and very dark and indistinct, and it was framed unmoving, but no particular sound associated with it. And when I pressed her further, she also said there was a sensation of cold. Then I asked her to mentally lift the pie to her mouth, as if to take a bite. As she pantomimed lifting the pie, the closer it got to her mouth, the more her facial expression sort of twisted into one of repulsion, and she even began to sort of gag. Having established a response to visualizing both her liked and her disliked food, all the submodalities associated with the stodgy meat pie were then used to replace what she previously associated with her beloved crisps. By revisiting the image of the crisp, working with her submodalities to mimic stodgy meat pie with cold gravy, her reaction was different. So the second time around, the image was now relocated to the lower left side. It had shrunk in size. It was dim, monochrome, out of focus. There was no sound. And when imagining opening the crisp, the packet appeared to be full of stodgy cold pie dripping with gloopy black gravy. And when she squeezed the packet, the cold pie and gelatinous gravy oozed over her fingers. The associated pleasure of before was completely replaced by disgust. To test how fixed this transference was, we worked with future pacing, where I encouraged her to try and imagine being tempted to eat the crisps at some point in the future. Her response was that her desire and compulsion to eat crisps, well, that completely disappeared. In fact, thinking about them actually made her feel queasy. If you attempt this exercise, you may find one submodality will dominate. For most of us, it tends towards the visual, but there's no right answer, when it comes to it. Whatever your preferred representational system, just go with it. You'll find your own rhythm. Once mastered, mapping across can be applied to anything where you need to change how you relate to it. This can also work in the reverse, by the way. So just as you can make an appetizing food seem disgusting, you can also make an unappealing one, perhaps a healthier food, much more desirable. So we've looked at anchoring, mapping across, future pacing, just 3 NLP techniques that you can help reach your weight loss goal and stick to it. All the techniques I've covered in today's video will help you mentally sustain your resolve, but I'd also advise coming up with a plan that you can work towards. Part of that might mean consulting a nutritionist, for example, if you really need to take control of your weight, because they can help you with a dietary plan that's specifically suited to your needs and objectives. In tandem with all of that, sorting out an appropriate exercise program, that can go a long way to helping you reach your goals that you set yourself as well. And if you find bad habits are creeping back, you may want to try plugging the gap with an ecology check. That is reviewing carefully your objections and concerns about your changing behavior as you try to move forward towards your desired self-image. When you stop a behavior, it initially leaves an emotional void. If you don't fill that void with an alternative, it's much easier to slip. This is particularly true of a food such as chocolate. Endorphins are not the only brain chemicals linked to chocolate consumption. Together with dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, these 4 neurotransmitters form the quartet that's responsible for our happiness, and they are all released when we eat chocolate. That's quite a chemical hit to have to face off. You need to find an alternative way to provide something to compensate to help you resolve. Finally, the chances are you may well slip up every now and then, and at the first fall, the instinct is just, particularly for women, to beat yourself up and to feel defeated. The urge to just stop trying is a common reaction, so please be prepared and go easy on yourself. Nobody's perfect. Stay focused on where you're headed, one step at a time, and keep going. If you lapse, dust yourself off and start over. In the words of Thomas Edison, many of life's failures are people who didn't realise how close they were to success when they gave up. So there you have it. A few strategies to try to help you out with your motivation and losing your weight. I hope you found this video helpful. Don't forget, I've added some links below to some of the other videos for the NLP techniques that I've mentioned. There's also a free guide to 3 more NLP techniques, and you can use another link below to download the PDF for that. And if you've tried any NLP techniques yourself, or you've got any questions, it'd be great to hear from you. So please do take a moment and add your comments below. And if you think that all of this might be a bit easier and more effective with the help of some life coaching with NLP, then all you have to do is to use the link that I've added below to this video to get in touch, make a 30-minute appointment with me for just a preliminary obligation-free chat. Don't forget to click subscribe to my channel to get these videos each and every week. I hope you can join me again next time for more on some of NLP's cutting-edge processes and techniques designed to help you lead a more fulfilling life. In the meantime, thanks again for your company, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.